All right, then. Are we live? Yes, it looks like we are live. Well, welcome everyone. Bienvenue, all my followers of darkness, shadow scavengers, and villain aficionados. Welcome to another Villains Review live discussion. Now, this time, honestly, for a villain to choose, like which one I would discuss about, I actually chose a real treat for this one. Which, of course, what better way to discuss villains than go back in time, to talk about old classic mustache twirling villains. So, for this specific occasion, I've chosen one of the most iconic mustache twirling villains of all time, Dick Dastardly. Now, of course, to be more specific, I haven't choose the Dick Dastardly from the plane shows, Stopping the Pigeon or the Wacky Racers, Hanna-Barbera in general. For this particular one, I decided to choose to discuss or explore the villain from the Scoob movie, voiced by Jason Isaacs, which, by the way, I just want to say he did a wonderful job in that movie, voicing Dick Dastardly. He really gave some meat to the character, not just being all skin and bone. So, as always, I'm your host, Lord of Shadows. So, without any further ado, let us begin, shall we? So, now, basically, like I said, I'm going to talk about Dick Dastardly from the Scoob movie. So, basically, Dick Dastardly, as a villain, he's basically a guy who, was the main villain of the Scoob movie, who owned a scrapyard, factory, and basically him and Muttley one day, they wanted to steal Alexander the Great's treasure, but of course everything went, you know, sideways, basically, in which Muttley, was stuck in the underworld, they couldn't get the treasure, through the portal. And of course, Dick Dastardly, after that, he went on a long crusade, trying to steal the free skulls of Cerberus, to try to open the gates of the underworld, to try and reunite with Muttley, and of course, to steal the treasure. And of course, in doing that, he came across, with the Blue Falcon, his crew, the Mystery Gang, basically all of them try to unite, and try to stop him, to foil his evil, supernatural in a way plan. So that's the overall villain's origin of Dick Dastardly from the Scoob movie. Now, the character itself, of the villain, I mean, I can go for on and on about him, because throughout the entire movie, it is literally when you see him in his work, as a villain, like he's basically it's like going back in time, like going back in the old days, when you have, he's one of those villains that, when you go back in time, like I mentioned a few seconds ago, those kind of villains, there's like I said, mustache twirling, diabolical, filled with charisma, monologuing to his heroes, foiling, trying to explain their evil plans, saying how the world will be theirs, world domination, how they're going to destroy the hero, etc., etc., etc. Like Dick Dastardly, as a villain, especially even in the Scoob movie, he possesses all those kind of elements when it comes to the overall character. I mean, like when it comes to the villain, if I had to categorize Dick Dastardly, from the Scoob movie, I mean, he's basically one greedy bastard. Well, to more precisely, a greedy mastermind. Basically, like I said, he's one of those villains, mustache twirling villains, that basically is kind of like the guy who schemes and strategically, creates, and orchestrates evil plots, basically from the shadows. Although I will say this, you know, even though Dick Dastardly, just like in the old classic like Hanna-Barbera world, like this Dick Dastardly, I would say, he is of course conniving as ever. That's for sure. But I will say this, like Dick Dastardly, one of the things I even like in the like even the old cartoons, I just have to say, like one of the things I do have to praise Dick Dastardly, and that is definitely, that he's a guy who really, can get, his hands dirty. Like, Owen says he's not ashamed to get his hands dirty, basically. And that's one of the things, of course, I do have to give him, credit for sure. But also, one of the things I also love about Dick Dastardly, especially from the Scoob movie, it is also, like basically the overall, like, I mean, the guy is like, I mean, even like just from just the overall design itself, like you can see, like, he's like one of those like old classic, criminal masterminds, mustache twirling, monologue speech, like big, monologue speeches, very, egocentric. Oh, like the guy is seriously egocentric, in this movie as well, especially when it comes to like, you know, himself, So, there's a lot of things that, about the Dick Dastardly, that kind of like didn't change from the good old days, But like, like even like the way how he speaks to his henchmen, basically always blaming them from like, the failures that sometimes he will do, or try to push them, do the like the job, for him and everything, because I know, but I will admit, and that's basically what Dick Dastardly is known for. But I will admit that in this movie, there's a lot of times he gets his own hands dirty. Like, yeah, I mean, he has these like little small cute droids, like robots, working for him and everything. But but most sometimes I will admit, when like he goes, in that line of work where basically you have to say, if you want a job well done, you have to do it yourself, and that's basically what he does, especially when he was hunting Scooby and Shaggy, especially for all that lost, like, abandoned carnival and everything, like, I will admit, he's not ashamed to get his hands dirty, so I that's one of the things either I have to give him respect for, and of course he's also the type of villain that he will stop and destroy anyone who gets in his way, which is definitely for sure. But one of the things I do have to admit that really, I mean, I'm going to talk about it a little bit later on. But one of the things I do have to mention is that I'm really kind of surprised, because when you have a villain like Dick Dastardly, you know, it's a type of villain, as I mentioned before, he's like in categories, he's kind of like a greedy mastermind, as a type of villain, basically, But I will, one thing that really surprised me in this movie is that, he's also, instead, not just him being conniving and, egocentric and selfish and arrogant at times, and showing like no mercy, destroying everything and everyone's path. The one thing really surprised me is that, how much he cared for like his favorite criminal co-conspirator, basically, Muttley. Like that's the one thing. I mean, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. That's just one of the things, like the overall connection that he has with him and everything. Like it's really kind of touched me, a little bit. As like when it comes to overall the villain world and everything, or the villain life, basically. Because usually when it comes to villains like that, usually like the ones that they don't care about their own henchmen, basically. Like I said, Dick Dastardly is one of them who basically will let the henchmen, do their, do the work, for them, and basically they're just simply the ones, who lie away, in their chambers, on a throne or whatever, and basically, enjoying the show. And of course, when something goes wrong, they always, hit the blame on their henchmen, even though sometimes there could be some things that even them could do, themselves, but Dick Dastardly, I would say it's kind of like a perfect balance between like, sometimes the henchmen do things, but also at the same time, he's the one, who also can get his hands dirty. Now, one of the other things about Dick Dastardly, I also do have to mention is that, you know, uh, like I said, did mention like at the beginning when Jason Isaac was talking, like, in an interview about this version of Dick Dastardly, like one of the things, like he said, is that he tries to, they wanted to give this Dick Dastardly, some a proper like meat on the bone, like, not simply like being all skin and bone, but like to give him like a much more meat. And they actually did, because this one, I would say, out of all the versions of Dick Dastardly I've seen, this one is definitely like one of the most ruthless ones I've seen. The way how he manipulated, everyone around him, like, also the way how he hunted down Scooby, and he was prepared to like, kill every single one of them, it's just simply to get him, and basically like. I mean, Dick Dastardly, he was always the guy, who always makes like, schemes and strategies and tactics, kind of like, try to obtain the goal, always making booby traps, and some little like, machineries and all of that. But this one, Oh my god! Like I definitely get the message when they said like put some meat on the bone. When it comes to like Dick Dastardly, and that's definitely what they shown in this version. And speaking of that, I mean, there's a lot of stuff about when it comes to strengths and weaknesses. Like there's a lot of stuff I do have to mention like for Dick Dastardly that I've seen like in the movie. I mean like one of the things definitely I was definitely surprised is that the genius level intelligence, the expertise in robotics and engineering, which is kind of like another big deal because he had also a little bit that in the wacky race as well. The power of persuasion, especially when he's in disguise. The tactical planning, master of disguises, which is again very rare to see in villains. These days, master of disguises. Or just simply putting some mask in general. He's like he's proven to be like very cunning. He also proven to have charisma, which is again something that he had even in the golden ages as well. So he didn't lose that. He also proven to be like a very fearsome leader. That's for sure. Being intimidating, manipulation. The occult knowledge. Especially when it comes to like the free skulls of Cerberus. That kind of proves that point. Durability. And also he possesses like intimidation and strength. And that really and especially like when it comes to like the overall genius level intelligence, like one of the things that really impressed me is that all the machinery that he created. I mean, the guy was like in a scrapyard. He was the owner of a scrapyard, so he literally had a lot of machinery there, basically as junk to create all of this. Now I mean, like the way how he created the overall like ship, the floating ship, the way how he created some like weapons, or even like the little robots that he created, like that's pretty ingenious. That's pretty ingenious. Which kind of proves like I mentioned also the knowledge he has for robotics. And and also again, one of the things I do have to praise, because it's been a long time since I've seen a villain that does that, which is a master of disguise. I mean, like the way how he persuaded and manipulated everyone who got in his way. Like for example, how he manipulated Fred, Shaggy to get him to Scooby Doo when he was disguised as Fred Jones, or like the way when he was confronting the mystery gang to get more information when he was dressed up as that female police officer. Like, man, like like he really surprised me. Like definitely manipulation and persuasion is definitely a few of the things I would love to put like with the character of Dick Dastardly from the Scoop movie. But but of course, with everything I've said, of course, there are also, weaknesses as well. Now, though everything I've said before, those are all strengths. But now with weaknesses, well, I mean, he has a lot of stuff that, usually those classic Golden Age villains have. The arrogance, the overinflated ego, the, also like, the stubbornness, the overconfidence they have, to, for themselves, also like the overall frustration of like when the heroes get in their way. Like there's every single weakness that this guy possessed is literally something that those Golden Age mustache twirling villains have. Also, again, one of the things the are underestimating your heroes. Again, one of the biggest flaws that villains can have is underestimating your opponents. Like for example, he underestimated the mystery gang because they thought like that they're just a bunch of teenagers. What the fuck they're gonna do with me? And that's and literally the same those teenagers, they foiled his plans. Basically, which again, one of the big weaknesses that usually villains like that have. But also, let's not forget, the ego. I mean, this guy is filled with egomania. I mean, like especially the way how he thinks of himself, like, again, done in a very goofy way. Like, for example, when people would like, for example, the mystery gang would try to insult, his overall looks, or even like, for example, when he praises Fred Jones, this guy's when he praised, his own ship, that that he basically built it. Like there's a lot of like egomania, the surrounding Dick Dastardly, but also at the same time it kind of also rivals self-confidence as well, which is also something that Dick Dastardly, possesses, as a weakness. But so again, I would say like between the strengths and weakness, I would say there's like a perfect balance, especially like when you have those like golden age type of villains like Dick Dastardly is. Usually those kinds of weaknesses balance the strength. Like nothing really, nothing really like significant about it, basically. But also one of the things that I always kind of found, I mean, one of the weaknesses usually those kind of villains like Dick Dastardly will have is like also the monologue thing, which again, it kind of also goes with the egomania thing, like, basically talking to the heroes, how he successfully stolen the skulls of Cerberus, how they were not foil his plan, and like, basically talking about so great about himself and all of that. Like, that's literally like, very typical villain monologue. And he did that like a few times in this movie, which also, again, going back to when it comes to weaknesses, it also goes all the way back to he is, again, charisma, but also at the same time, overinflated ego. Which again, when it comes to like weaknesses, like I mean, when you have ego, basically, because one of the things for villains, one of the things definitely is one of the greatest weaknesses besides underestimating your opponents. One of the biggest weaknesses the villains could have is the ego, because I mean, every single villain, like every single superhero, they need to have a little bit of ego to keep moving. But if you get things like that out of control, then you become the power freak, all that, egomania, all the charisma basically, gets overinflated, that gets, that basically gets overhyped up and everything until basically, like some, and then basically, leaks basically like a gas balloon, and just all you need to do is just simply light up a match and boom, everything, blows up. And that's literally what Dick Dastardly, also did a little bit, in this movie, basically. Now, so yeah, I mean, like, and also, I mean, one of also his strengths is definitely, the robots that that he created, which definitely, like, I mean, they are cute, but when they get in their deadly form as like those, like, chainsaw hand scorpions, oh my god, like, like you that's one of the things I do have to praise him, like, his overall genius, of like, robotics and engineering that he did. Oof. The guy, being in a scrapyard, he had a long time to create all of this, and it's very, very remarkable, very remarkable. Now, one of the things, now when it comes to like, of course, every villain, there's also about the villain's goal. And for someone like Dick Dastardly, it's basically very simple. Very simple. Get all the free skulls of Cerberus, open the gates to the underworld, rescue Muttley, and of course, get the treasure. And of course, during all that villainy crusade, destroy everyone who gets in his way. Again, every single thing, very, very stylish, classic goals. But I would say this, it's kind of refreshing, I mean, all this kind of goes because usually, when you have villains like that, usually it's like world domination. But for something like that, I would say it's kind of refreshing, going away from the old, ruling the world and domination and all that. Like, basically, to kind of get your hands on, like, saving your henchmen and at the same time getting some treasure. Again, very simple goal. Kind of also leads to his greed, because this also, I forgot to mention, that's also one of the weaknesses of Dick Dastardly is the greed, basically, that he had for the treasure and everything. That's also one of the things that kind of, got him down. But one of the things that really impressed me in this one, I mentioned that before of the description of the character itself, and that is basically the care, the care, the connection he had with Muttley, because I will never forget when he opened the portal. He had all the treasure in the underworld. He had all that treasure, but the first thing he went for was Muttley. He wanted to save Muttley, even though, ironically, he is the one who pushed him through the portal to get the treasure, which kind of goes into that selfishness, arrogance, like, hey, you're my henchman, do the dirty stuff, I'm just going to watch behind, with a bag of popcorns, eating, while you get the treasure and everything, Which also I forgot one of the things about Dick Dastardly, which is definitely a weakness. That is, of course, selfishness. The guy is, he's very, very selfish as well. But I think after all these years, because it's very rare. I will say this: it's very rare when you have a villain that actually cares for his henchmen. Because in Dick Dastardly's point of view, I think the reason why he cares about Muttley, because I think out of all the years he has been as a criminal, I think he was the only friend he ever had, because without him he felt alone. So I can also even believe that the reason why he wasn't doing any actual schemes, even though he had a long police record, but I think the reason why there was no schemes, and again, it's just kind of like a theoretical way how I think about Dick Dastardly as a villain in Scoob. I believe that he, after he lost Muttley, I think his crime wave basically got lower and lower and lower and lower until it basically became like an absolute zero, because he got bored and tired of doing all this alone, because it wasn't the same as it was when he was with Muttley. He felt like it wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't exciting anymore. So what he does all of that shenanigans with the skulls of Cerberus, all of the shenanigans to hunt down Scooby, to open the portal, to primarily get Muttley, and then the treasure. That I do have to say, for me, for a villain like that deserves some respect. That actually deserves some praises and respect. I love the way how he talked about Muttley when he was confronting Fred Jones, Velma, and Daphne. I love that scene, which kind of shows you that nothing was the same when Muttley disappeared. When he went through the portal, and you can see that he was missing, which kind of also makes you look like that he's actually very emotional. That actually made him very emotional, because he's one of those villains that is afraid of being alone. I mean, he had all those robots, but he never considered them as not just simply as actual henchmen, but he never considered them even as friends, as family. That for him was Muttley, So for a villain that does all that shenanigans to basically go and save his own henchmen, and then after that take the loot, deserves some respect for me. Oh, that definitely does earn some respect. Definitely. Which of course, it's a little bit unusual to see in a villain like that, but still, it's kind of cool to see it. And again, with everything I said, from the villain goal and everything, Dick Dastardly with me was a little piece of fresh air, basically. Because usually when you have villains, most of them is either revenge or power or world domination. But for this, so with Dick Dastardly's overall goal, it was a bit refreshing. And I will say this: I never saw Dick Dastardly as someone who was interested in the occult. I never saw him as this type of supervillain. So that was also kind of a bit of a surprise. The addition they had, to the overall character. And also one of the other things I love is that the confrontation he had with Scooby-Doo in the mirror, in the mirror room, basically. Because you can see also at the same time, I think Dick Dastardly had a little bit of desperate. He was a little bit desperate, a little bit throughout the movie, especially the time when he was talking to Scooby, you're the key to open the gates of the underworld. Join me, Scooby-Doo, and I will give you whatever you want. Yeah, join me. And I will make you fulfill your destiny. You can. That was basically manipulation. But also at the same time, you have this feeling he was a little bit desperate, basically, not just even for the treasure, but to get Muttley. You can see there was a little desperation in the moment, but also at the same time, like I said, he showed a lot of charisma, but also, oh my God, this kind of goes with the ego thing. For example, when Scooby was making fun of his name, he couldn't say, the letter D. He was call me Dick, and he's like, all right, Rick. No, I'm not a Rick. I'm a dick with a D. Rick with a D. Dick. Rick. And he continued to explain when he's like, dick. Like, oh my God, that was kind of, hilarious. Oh my God, you know. So overall, I do have to say, like, Dick Dastardly is definitely like a golden age, like very classic mustache twirling, villain. But at the same time, some of the changes, kind of like this to give him a little bit more meat on the bone. For me, was like more than welcome, So when it comes to like the overall rating about the character of Dick Dastardly, I mean, I do have to, again, even though with all the weaknesses that he had, when it comes to all as a villain, which again, as I said, it was it was arrogance, overconfidence, the egomania, a little bit of like of desperation, the selfishness, the selfish elements, as well. Also, kind of like the and also also the overall greed for the treasure, a little bit of power as well, but even though it was mostly greed, you know he still surprised me as a villain. I think like I still think today he was one of the best parts of the overall movie, Scoob. So overall, as a villain, I will give him like an honest 7 out of 10 shadows. Like even I know like some people might think like it's not a very big rating, but for a villain like him, because usually villains, because I will tell you this, because usually villains like Dick Dastardly, usually for me they'll be way lower than that. I think like for me it'll be like they'll be like between 5 to like 6.5, maybe even like it wouldn't be that high, because those kind of villains, they don't have anything too much to dig, basically, about the overall character. Like they're very simple, very predictable, very they have very basic, like, goals and skills and weaknesses and all that, So this, for Dick Dastardly, especially the version from Scoob, it's a great grade. It's a really great rating, for someone like him. So overall, 7 out of 10 shadows for me personally, which I think like is a really well deserved rating for someone like him, for sure. And with that, we basically came to another end to another villains review episode. I mean, like, I mentioned before, like I enjoyed Dick Dastardly every time when I see the Scoob movie. I really enjoyed him as a villain. Again, very classic, very golden age with some like modernized elements kind of added to his own character. Like for example, like this version, like he's the guy who really doesn't show mercy. Like for example, when he was hunting down Scooby and he was willing to destroy Shaggy just to get to him. Also the way how he doesn't tolerate failures, which again, it's another thing that villains usually do. They don't tolerate failure. But so this kind of like is not a big deal. But with everything said, it was practically a solid villain. Yeah. And with that, we come to an end to another villains review episode. I hope you guys have enjoyed the overall discussion I had with you about Dick Dastardly. Of everything else, you guys know the drill. Comment, like, subscribe, give me your own personal thoughts about Dick Dastardly. What do you think of him as a villain? What did you thought about his role in the Scoob movie or the Scoob movie in general? Everything in the comment section down below. If you're interested to see my previous villains review episodes of season 2, or even the entire like villains review season 1, everything will be in the description, in the video description down below as well. So without any further ado, stay tuned for more upcoming videos. And as always, Lord of Shadows signing off. And until next time, the only thing I can say to you is later, fuckers.